I've been approached by many a person who asked me, let me put this with some intelligence, who asked me how I knew about something. Well, first of all, Bruce Geller, who created Cinnamon Carter, as you know by the name, he wanted a kind of sweet spice. That was what he said. She was not named when I first went aboard, as they say. She was the girl, a common nomenclature for women at that time in television, the girl. And what was really extraordinary about the genesis of the show and how I became involved was Bruce Geller was a writer. He'd come out from New York. He was interested in the process of acting, was interested in everything. And he joined an acting class that Martin Landau was teaching, I was in, Nicholson was in it, Harry Dean was in it. It was a really fabulous class. Robert Town, who became a well-known screenwriter, Chinatown. And Bruce came, the intent being that writers should have some sense of what actors, how they work, what they do, how they realize or try to the material that they write. So Bruce was inspired by, he wrote Martin's role, which was originally called Martin Land. The network thought it was too close. They found a name that fit the same type space, Rollin Hand. And then he wrote The Girl, and he told me later that he actually inadvertently had written me in. He wanted The Girl to be a kind of different kind of combination of things that was at that time kind of common in Hollywood, which was either you were the girl next door or you were the wild woman sex symbol. He wanted both. And for some reason I seemed to qualify. Given that, he wrote it in and then had some difficulty casting me because I was unknown, and they sent everybody that was around the city to go in and see him. And he very quietly kept asking me to come in. So I must have gone in 26 times at least. And the final approval had to come from Lucille Ball because she owned the show. She was developing it for television. And I had to go in and see her. Pretty extraordinary because, as I say, I was unknown. I had done some television, but there was always that concern around the city. Who is she? And my agent wanted to send over the last show I had done, which was a comedy. I said, don't send Lucille Ball a comedy. Please, could I just go meet her? It'll be better, I think, than me competing in any way on that level, let alone the show wasn't a comedy. Anyway, they agreed. I went over. She was in this little bungalow, which was her office, which is now the child care center on the Paramount lot. As they say, we've come a long way. So I walked in. She took a look at me. She looked at me head to toe. Looks okay to me, she said. That was it. So I looked okay to her and walked out of there with the role. I didn't think it was too complicated. I thought the first script, when you first got the script, what happened all along, it was just an absolutely glorious situation in every way possible, probably because Bruce had seen me in an acting class, and he had a real sweet conclusion in his heart that I could play a lot of different things. So the role began to expand over that first season. I had the best possible role for a young actress on television. I got to look great, wear wonderful clothes, and then be thrown in a prison camp and beg for my life. What do you want? If you're a young actress, it was just great. So that happened during that whole first year. It just kept yeasting into something more and something more. And they, the writers that then came aboard, really, I guess the word would have to be respected me. That was good. So there was a nice feeling all around. And I never felt I disappointed them either. So it was just an extraordinary time, everything about it. No, they were not supposed to. Please, if you knew everything about them, you could get to them, and the whole point was they were unreachable in a certain way, because if you could, the one time they found out something about cinnamon and locked me up in a small space because they had some knowledge of my nature, which was scripted, of course, then they used it to torture me. And they came just in time and got me out. So, yes, so you didn't want to know. You kind of wrote it yourself, watching it. There was competence, there was ability in each person. Each one had a clarity about what they did well. That was Bruce. There was no kind of overlapping of what skills each character had. So you knew them that way. You might not know how they got there to those skills and viewpoints about life, but you knew they had them. And in that first year, just in terms of texture, when we were in that apartment scene, that Bruce had the idea to shoot in black and white in color. So that scene was always dressed in black and white, but shot in color. And all the film kids liked that. And the other textural thing about that was that we didn't ask questions. We didn't say with naivete, you mean there's a 20,000-ton megaton bomb there? We stated it. Even though it was written with a question mark, by the way, which meant we all were aware of the danger, just confirming it. And of course, in so doing, letting the audience know the trouble we were about to get into. But basically, it wasn't a question. Or why were we in the room? Bruce was a really, really brilliant man, boy. We were kind of in that middle stage, all of us. We were actually pretty young kids. He was the most taciturn human I've ever met. His big excitement would rise to about, that's nice. And that is how he dealt with the networks and everything else, quietly. They'd come and complain about something, he'd just stand there and he'd kind of shake his head, make a couple of noises, look like he agreed, and walk away and then go do what he was doing. It was brilliant, actually, to not engage that way and have screaming fits. He saw no need to do it. He was very clear about what he was doing. And that was an incredibly comforting feeling to know that in essence we were in good hands. You know, the first season, one of the producers came down on the set and said, "Can you come into we need to loop a moment." And I said, "Sure, as soon as we finish this, that." And I went down there and it was the word, "oh." I thought, wow, they're being so meticulous about everything. This is a good place to be. They were watching every little thing well. It was good, very good. And of course, probably the most compelling thing about it in its time, and certainly for me, was that this girl kind of held her own with the big boys. It was one of the few women in those days of television who was not stirring a pot and saying, "Yes, dear," "No, dear," which was kind of sweet, but had nothing to do with what I got to do. And it had a lot of effect on a lot of young women through the years. No, I just saw myself as doing what felt right. I didn't have to stretch to feel an independent kind of sense of myself and capable in relation to anybody else around. I did feel that. Anyway, I found that out later. I also knew it was different and groundbreaking for the times. I didn't know that. I didn't attach it to me and say, I am a role model. No. I was having too good a time to think of that. Ultimately, I understood that because a lot of young women had come up to me to this day and they'll tell me in supermarkets and all kinds of, airports, etc. Number one, they're named Cinnamon. If they're not named Cinnamon, they pursued a certain career or did something because they got the idea watching it when they were little that they could do something. So I hear a lot of that, and that's pretty neat. It's kind of interesting how that has come down. There's a truth in it without question. The truth was where we were in time at that moment in this country. The year before, Nat Cole could not keep a network show on. The South would not play, I don't know, 15 minutes, half-hour network show. Wouldn't play it. Then the year right along at that time, I Spy came out. So there was Kaz kind of joking around and being awfully cute, and always having a woman of color in terms of the romantic thing. Okay? And there we were. And Bruce selected Greg. It was a very conscious choice to have an intelligent man in a job which required a certain kind of expertise and it not to be an issue. It became an issue of panic for the network before we went on the air. They just were really frightened. And they came down with many suggestions on how to, when you say, what did you say we weren't supposed to do? Stand next to each other?
Right, yes, too close and talk too much to each other.
Oh, yes. But Bruce didn't listen. So in that apartment, it was in the apartment scene, and in other scenes throughout, there were no romances on the show anyway amongst us. We were all working together. They had various problems, panic mostly. And then we went on the air, and America didn't die, and nothing happened at all. I don't even think there was a letter of concern. And then they stopped saying, well, it's really, isn't it hard to light them next to each other? And the answer would be, well, we're not having too much trouble. We kind of just cool it. A lot of insidious questions like that, for no reason, but worry. They were worried. With a certain amount of good reason, if you consider the times and where we were. And I don't think they were in the business at the time of groundbreaking anything. They were trying to just win the ratings, which we did anyway. So I couldn't equate it. Anything you're doing at the time, you take it up fully and find every possible thing in it. And at that given moment, it's alive to you. It's what you're doing. That's it. The sense of style and what it was and the feeling for it was pretty understood by us. We walked to Lalo's music, even though it wasn't played on the soundstage, obviously, but we knew it, and there was a sense of walking to it that was fun, to have that as part, like he was another partner. He was there with us all the time. So there was an understanding to us of the style of it. Yes. I don't know. I don't have anything against action or words. I like them both. I don't think that was a consideration. Certainly for me playing all those different roles, there were certainly words in those roles. Maybe there were a lot of knowing looks in the other part of it, but in those interior roles, there were a lot of things said and done that were fun to do. I don't know that in terms of, you mentioned the elements, the specific elements. What I know is it was well done. That I know. Like when I mentioned that it took me off the set just to say, oh, better than it had been said. It was very well done. It was tight. It was clean. We got the script only the next one, maybe a day before we started shooting. We get in the makeup room and we were all eager to find out, oh, what's this one going to be like? There was no diffidence and no kind of, here we go again feeling. We were very excited about it. So that energy was there. And I can tell you that only once, I read the script and there was this sudden thing that didn't make sense I read it again because I always assume in the reading I didn't get it. Let me try again. I read it. I only had the next day to get it, so I went upstairs. It was the second floor where the writers were and where Bruce was. And as I walked in the door, they said to me, oh, that thing where she's clumsy and bumps into things, I think that was what it was. That's from the original script. We've taken it out. Before I even mentioned it. So they were so on top of it. It was just, which is why it was so good.
Well, it's not a story you hear about a lot of TV shows.
No.
And what do you attribute that level of detail?
Bruce Geller knew what he was doing. Yes. And he had a hard time the first year finding some writers who could write, because he needed a certain kind of brain to write that puzzle within a puzzle. And a lot of very good writers in the city who could write, because there was some good writing going on, and couldn't write that show. He used to say, you had to have a little larceny in your soul to write it. But given that, I don't know why, other than the inventiveness of the tape or the inventiveness of the various things you mentioned, certainly Lalo's music, which was gorgeous. I think it was that it was so well done. I don't know. We had a lot of fun with unknown foreign governments. I remember meeting somebody, I'm trying to think what the situation was, because it was a sort of, he was a Russian diplomat who came up to me and said, why I always have to tell son that the bad guys are like me. His son had grown up here. He had been living here for a long enough time. And he was always explaining to his son that on our show he was the bad guy. Well, I said, be as good a guy as you can, and then he'll have to see that you're not such a bad guy, you know. But that, yeah, it caused some. I must say later, even when we were still not very comfortable with the Russians, as we seem to be once again, the Olympics, when they came here to the city, I was involved in the dance portion and bringing some of the dance companies from across. And the Russians at the time didn't have a embassy here. They had a legation up in San Francisco. And they flew down, and he couldn't fly over the Air Force base, I remember. That was part of it. He couldn't drive past it, kind of fly over it. And I met him on the stage of the Pasadena auditorium, because I was involved, and he was checking everything. Like that stage was built like stages used to be. There was a trap door. He was checking that. He didn't want anybody to defect. The hotel rooms. And the entire time he was kind of looking at me, and he was uneasy, and he finally realized that I was the person from Mission Impossible who used to always win against him. So it was a kind of interesting moment, because he couldn't fully express it. We were still in that time. But he said something to the effect that, oh, you know, and he went on a bit about it. And then I thought it must have been a funny scene over a trap door on a stage in Pasadena. Also kind of, it thrived on the idea of appearances. What something appeared, I have a uniform on, I have a badge, I have a certain hat on, or my truck says so-and-so, and that gave us access. Like it was real, you know, so there was a lot of, if you put a nurse's uniform on, patient let you give them a lethal injection, you know. So appearances were kind of an interesting aspect of what Bruce was dealing with. No, I couldn't under the circumstances. I wish it was able to go on the way it was. You know, it was a whole buyout of the studio and another buyout. This one company ate up the next one and the next one and the next one. In the course of that gigantic eating of Desilu, which became Paramount, which became, there were a lot of changes, and those changes provoked the problems. So at the same time, you know, Bruce was asked to leave. Highly chagrined to have been served notice papers that morning, and then go out there and say, "Hi, everybody. Everything's just fine." Well, it wasn't, and I had to say so. I was sued that morning for breach, when in fact they had breached me. So it was very ugly. And it was not only ugly, but it took a year to sort out. And it was not a fun year at all. So it went, its ending for me was unpleasant as could be. You know, I'm not sure I'm free to talk about this. I'm really not, but I've been approached by many a person who asked me, let me put this with some intelligence, who asked me how I knew about something. And I told them that the writers wrote it, and I said the words. But there were things that happened in that show that I've traveled much of the world, and in all kinds of cities, all kinds of people have kind of sidled up to me at art galleries and looked at me kind of like this, which we never did, and said, "How did you know about that submarine?" So yes, is your answer to that. It's kind of funny through the years. It's sort of like asking, well, who is it now, or House, to cure them from some disease, because, you know, I don't think he's a doctor. And I was never a spy, but I perceived as such. So, yes, a lot of people ask me funny questions in Egypt, in London, at airports. Stock answer, I'm not so good at it, one way or the other. I either asked them if they liked the painting on the wall, or just said that the writers wrote it. I didn't. And I didn't. So it wasn't stock, it was just true. No. As such, no. I never thought of myself as a role model. I just thought of myself as kind of strong-willed, smart-ass person who set out to do what I wanted to do pretty well. And I like that. Can't argue with that. I don't, you know, my way of, I just have to do the best I can with whatever I'm doing. If I do that, I'm happy. I go home, I don't care about the rest of it much. So, was I a role model? I don't know. I did know that she was a doctor at that time, projected in the future, and that she was very driven, because one would have to be to achieve that position. What I thought, I made up for myself that maybe her father had cured cancer. So now what was I going to come up with? So something like that, to give the sense of somebody who had to do something wondrous in the world and end up as such on Moonbase Alpha. You kind of go through all those fun things with yourself, because there would be something that generated that kind of need to do something wonderful. I didn't think of it as as a role model. I would find people responding that way, and that's okay, but that isn't what I think actors do. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be a role model. I don't know. I didn't. What was interesting was that the premise was interesting, that we on the Earth had dumped a lot of nuclear waste on the moon, and it caused this explosion, which caused, we were sort of exploratory scientific base up there, not a, as they said to us when they sent the first Sputnik up. They told us this is not going to ever have military ramifications. We were Moon Base Alpha, Space 1999. We were not up there for military purpose. We were up there for scientific purposes. Therefore, we weren't armed. Therefore, when we were blasted out of Moon's orbit, or a piece of the Moon, when we went out of Earth's orbit, we had no way to protect ourselves. So everything we encountered was a threat. So, and how do we deal with a threat without arms? So that was the basic premise. So that was kind of interesting. So again, we had to outwit them, outlive them, out-something them. And there was the ever hopeful, we're going to find a home here. We were looking for a home. So we were a bunch of lost in space, but a little different, yearning for a home, and encountering people who didn't like us because we were stinky Earth people or some such thing. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of what it was. So it was an interesting premise in that regard. And then we could encounter all kinds of phenomenon and have to deal with it. And some of which has, of course, occurred. We had very interesting discussions because I guess Arthur Clarke had some input with Sylvia and Jerry Anderson, and we all knew that you wouldn't hear sound. And then we thought, well, that's all well and good, but we can't make a show without sound, so we have to go past that one. And there were those issues. At least they were worthy of discussion, if not resolution. We couldn't resolve them exactly. It's your job. That's your job. Period. That's what you're there for. There's no room for, I don't feel like it. I don't want to do it now. First of all, in the long run, it's you that's going to be up there. So, and in the theater, you know, people bought tickets. It's your job. And what's interesting about the job is it's now. There's a nowness to what we do. People call it in the moment, whatever they call it. It's now. It's 8 o'clock, the curtain's up. It's we're ready for you, we're doing the close-up. It's now. And for me, there's something incredibly, almost visceral about not stopping time, but like touching it. You're actually touching it. Ooh. I'm gonna get perfectly silly on you, but there's something about that that's one doesn't recover from.